All right. We are live on a very rare evening edition of Coffee with Rich.
Coffee in the evening? What the heck?
I know.
You're going to be up all night.
I know. I actually, to prepare for this, Glenn, because you're a high energy guy, I had 2 espressos before we got started. So while we're waiting for folks to jump on, because I just got the notification that we are live, let me go ahead and read sponsors here. One of our first sponsors is precisionholsters.com. Precision Holsters, maker of the Ultra Appendix, which I'm wearing, as well as their competition line of products, which are phenomenal, by the way. I also highly recommend their tactical belt. Check them out. The easiest way to check out all of our sponsors today is hit the link below, AmericanWarriorShow.com, and all of the sponsor links are there, discount codes, etc. Also, Mountain Man Medical. As Glenn will probably tell you, you're probably far more likely to need that trauma medical kit than you are the firearm. So please check out Mountain Man Medicals and our good friends over there. We have a co-branded kit that you can buy now and pre-order, and it was put together by my good friend, former MARSOC operator Justin Carroll. Cool Fire Trainer, dude, ammo prices are crazy, and I think Glenn's going to talk to us a little bit about hyperinflation and some of the threats coming there. I don't see ammo pricing coming down anytime soon. Get a Cool Fire Trainer, take your dry fire to the next level. APP Hemp, CBD products. I use them, as you can tell from the scratches on my forehead and issues with my nose. When you're doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, turns out strangling someone, they don't like it, and they sometimes fight back. So if you have bad joints, I find that CBD products really help me with my joints. Finally, Century Martial Arts, makers of the Bob XL. I highly recommend it for your striking routine, because if you are going to be the one surviving the incident, some of the incidents that Glenn and I are going to talk about. And here in just a moment, I'm going to read Glenn's amazing bio, but you need to understand something. Today's Coffee with Rich with Glen Tate is brought to you by the American Warrior Society and the American Warrior Show, which is America's #1 podcast. And I would venture a guess, Glenn, that Prepping 2.0, your podcast, is probably the prepping show to listen to.
I don't want to brag, but I think we have a quality product. My wife, Shelby, and I, she's also a prepper fiction author, put a lot of time and energy into it. We are very fortunate to have amazing guests either come to us or return my emails. And they're people that I've listened to their shows forever. And I email them and they go, "Oh yeah, Glenn, I've heard your show." And it's like, "Oh my goodness, are you kidding me?" I get starstruck. So I think we put together a really good show because we focus on really practical stuff. We're not out there saying, here's how to build a backyard nuclear reactor to have permanent energy or something like that. Because we're normal people, right, with a normal budget and a normal amount of time. And so we get it. So anyway, yeah, I'm not going to say it's better than any other show, but I'm really, really proud of it. And we put a lot of work into it. And it's been very, very popular. And I'm very thankful for that. And it's free. There's a Patreon version, but most people listen to it for free, which is cool. We're helping people out. Good.
Yeah, I've listened to your show and really enjoy the content. And you have some amazing guests on there. Everybody from actresses to Mike Glover, who a lot of folks in our community are familiar with. Glenn, let's see who we got on this evening. Will Rhodes is on. Says, "Hey, Rich and Glenn, good evening from Missouri." Roman is on. Kevin is on. He says he's coin number 1334 from Texas. If you want to find out what a coin number is, check out AmericanWarriorSociety.com. Walt is on. Says, "Hello, Rich and Glenn." Jeremiah is on from Ohio, coin number 2103. John is on from Yukon. Greg is on. Walt. Guile is on for the Philippines. Guys, please hit that share link before we get going. I promise you, you are definitely going to want to listen to this at least once, if not twice, and share it with your friends. Let me introduce Glenn officially. Glenn wrote the best-selling 10-book prepper novel series, 299 Days. His wife, Shelby, wrote the 3-book prepper novel series, A Great State. Glenn is a lawyer. Please don't hate him. Who sues the government for a living. God bless you. Glen and Shelby are relocating to Montana in the summer of 2021. As I already mentioned, Glenn is also the podcast host of the amazing show, Prepping 2.0. Glenn, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much. This show's a big deal, and I'm honored to be a guest.
Well, thank you, brother. Let's get this out of the way, man. You had a very brief, succinct bio, but what does your bio overlook?
2 things. First of all, I'm a regular guy. I've never been in the military, never been in law enforcement. I'm not some SEER instructor or some Delta dude that's telling people about survival. I stumbled into this 10, 12 years ago. I realized, I started observing things. I realized that this country was headed for some badness, and that with just-in-time inventory and all these things, the entire country as a whole, was pretty unprepared. So I just started learning stuff on my own. Everything that I've learned and all the experiences I've had have been self-taught, a lot of YouTube, and a lot of hanging out with just amazing people. Once the books were published, I had all these really cool people that had all this really cool experience that were legit, unlike me, and started becoming friends with them and listening and learning from them. So my point with all this is, I don't have any credentials, and I'm cool with that. I don't care. I mean, I don't really care if I have credentials, but I've learned a lot of stuff, and I come at it, like I mentioned earlier about the podcast, very practical, very regular guy, very budget conscious, very realistic and practical. So that's one thing. The other thing, I just had my chemo pump pulled out about 2 hours ago. Short version of the story, it didn't make the bio because I try not to dwell on it. This isn't the Glen Tate, health and crying and sorrow hour. Short version of the story is this spring, I live in a blue state currently, Washington, which I'm moving out of for a variety of reasons. The idiot communist governor of my blue state decided to cancel all cancer screenings, to empty out the hospitals, to flatten the curve. So I had a test that indicated I was at high risk for colon cancer. My cancer screening got canceled, and then there was a huge backlog. Who saw that coming? And I was never rescheduled. So I had emergency cancer surgery in February, went very, very well. I'm going to be fine, but I'm in the middle, slightly past the middle of chemotherapy. Had infusion Monday, so that was 2 days ago. And like I say, about 2 hours ago, they pulled the needle out of the port in my heart. And so I'm under the effects of chemotherapy right now. But quite honestly, just kind of powering through it. So try to be high energy, and it's fine. But I just mention this. I'm not trying to be political, but I'm mentioning this. If you live in a blue state or around COVID idiocy, and that's tapering off a bit now, but last year it was a bigger deal. It can get you killed or injured being in one of these dumb states. And luckily, it looks like I'm going to be okay, but it is a big life event, and it's changed my outlook on life a variety of ways. And if we get into it, we do. But I don't want this to be, the the chemotherapy show, because nobody wants that. But by the way, you mentioned CBD products. Highly recommended for things like this. Highly recommended. I can attest to that. So that's about the only thing I would add to the bio.
Okay. Thanks, Glenn, man. I'm glad your health is doing better, brother. We'll keep you in our prayers. And I don't say that flippantly. I mean, I mean that.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, man, why did you choose law, and what do you do with your JD?
Why do I choose law? When I was about 8 or 10, I grew up very poor. I mean, like super poor. And my grandpa, who's a great, great man, came out to visit. And every time he'd come out to visit us, it would break his heart, because he's just like, oh my goodness, my grandkids are growing up in poverty. This is terrible. And so I'd always been rather talkative. I guess that's one way to put it. So he said to me one day, he's an American Indian, and he said to me, you should be a lawyer. And I remember saying to him, I'm going to get choked up, Grandpa, only rich people can be lawyers. He said, not in America. Sorry, I'm emotional. That always gets to me. And so I started thinking about it, and he was right. And so I was a Soviet studies major. I'll let you read between the lines on that one. And went to law school. And I went to law school because I love, this sounds crazy, people, you're never going to hear another lawyer say this, I love fighting bullies. I've been fighting bullies my whole life. Seemed like a really good way to do it, right? And so I'm intrigued by law, but I'm not intellectual. I hated law school. I hate lawyers. I hated law students. I don't hang out with lawyers. Most of them are pretentious and pompous, and they think because they have Juris Doctor after their name, they're like something special. The best man at my wedding is a logger. And, my first wedding. And I'll hang out with people and it's weeks into it and they'll go, so what do you do for a living? I go, I'm a lawyer. And they go, shut up. And that's the highest compliment I can be paid. So yeah, I love it. I love the intellectual pursuit. It's not for everybody. I love suing the government. Talk about a great way to fight back against bullies. And I know this sounds corny or political. It absolutely is not. Helping the little guy against the giant machine is very rewarding. It's also a lot of hard work and frustrating, but it's worth it. So that's why I became a lawyer. And I worked in the fields when I was a kid, and I did not like it at all. And I said, I need an indoor job. I guess I got one.
I guess you got one. And I tell you, for those of you that probably know, you know, I'm a retired Marine Corps officer, former police officer, and having been on the inside of this Hobbesian Leviathan, I can assure you, I'm glad that people like you are out there, Glenn, fighting the good fight, because there's a lot of good people on the inside, but there's a lot of bad people on the inside as well.
Yeah.
You know, so how did you end up, you know, you're an attorney. How did you end up becoming the author of the 299-day series?
Hope you have a moment. It's the Easter Bunny. Every time I say the reason I became the author of this 10-book series is because of the Easter Bunny. A lot of people in the audience probably think Rich Brown just booked an absolute lunatic who's going to talk about the Easter Bunny. Not so. I was prepping, and with my first wife, when I was married to her, she was extremely resistant to it. That's a storyline in the book, and it's very, very accurate. And so I realized, and she's very intelligent, she's a physician. I realized that when the collapse happened and all of a sudden all this stuff, ammo cans and food and stuff that I had hidden in storage units across the city, because I couldn't store it at my house because we couldn't talk about this because there was never any bad news. Nothing bad ever happens in America. So I needed to have an explanation for why all this stuff showed up. So I started thinking. And since and I needed to show my wife respect, and I couldn't say, I told you so, you know, I was right, here's all this stuff, you're wrong. Because that's a crossroads of a marriage when stuff's falling apart. It's a really terrible time to say, I told you so. And it's just not polite. So I had to come up with a story. So I came up with the Easter Bunny. And I was going to say, I had this speech all prepared, and I was working on it in my head. Honey, the Easter Bunny came by, dropped some stuff off. It's all cool. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's why the Easter Bunny picked this stuff. And so I thought, this is kind of an important speech. By the way, I never gave the Easter Bunny speech, but, and so I had a little Post-it note. I'm a huge fan of Post-it notes. I did a little bullet point thing on a Post-it note of the Easter Bunny speech. And I go, wow, this is a really good explanation of why people should prep, how to prep, and what to do once the collapse unfolds, what to do with this stuff. And a great way to convince a reluctant spouse, because there are a lot of them. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, I think Prepping 2.0 has been so popular, is that we talk about this. My second wife, Shelby, and I, you know, talk about this topic. It went undiscussed for the longest time. I was the only one I know of who ever said, yeah, I married somebody who hates prepping and thinks I'm a lunatic. People don't talk that way. They talk about their time on SEAL Team 6 that they never really had because they're making it up. So back to the Easter Bunny speech. And I thought, this is such a good little bullet point thing. I'm going to make it a 1-pager. And then it became a 2-pager. And I started filling in details. And then I thought, and I'd never written fiction before. I knew so little about fiction. Here's a great illustration of that. That I write legal briefs. It's entirely different kind of writing. That I had to go to my first wife's bookcase and look at her fiction books that she had to see if the commas went inside the quote marks or on the outside. I didn't even know the punctuation format for fiction. And I never read fiction because I never had any time. So the cool thing, if you don't mind me saying, about 299 Days book series is it's like nothing else because I didn't copy anything. It doesn't have a novel feel to it because I don't read novels.
Right.
And it was just, well, we'll get into that. So this became longer and longer. So I said, well, I'm going to do a 1-chapter thing. It's going to be the Easter Bunny speech. Now that I've learned where the commas and the quote marks go. And I said, I'll put it up on I'm sorry, with the chemo, sometimes the words, it's a terrible time. You picked a terrible time to interview me. podcast, the survival podcast, back in 2010 or so. So I'll just put it up, whatever, it'll help some people. And I never did that because then I wrote one chapter and I wrote two. And by the time I was done 3 years later, it was 4,000 pages in Word, 12-point font. And so it became a 10-book series because I couldn't stop writing, because I think God was trying to get messages out through me. I'll just leave it at that. It's not a religious show. That's cool. I'm not trying to be religious. But candid answer is that's what I think was happening. So I couldn't stop writing. And all these cool people that I'd met and all these great characters that were real life people, I just started like fusing them together in this storyline. And I'm not even kidding. I couldn't stop writing it. I would get up at 1 in the morning, 3 in the morning, and my head would be full of ideas, and I would get it out. So to answer your question, I had, just like I'm a regular guy, I had no writing experience, never thought in a million years I'd be a fiction writer, never even occurred to me. And I just wrote some stuff down. Now, apparently, I found out later, apparently the way you publish books is you go to a publisher and you go, hey, I got an idea for a book. And they go, oh, okay, well, if it doesn't suck, we'll publish it. See, I never thought anyone would read this. So I wrote 4,000 pages and then went to a publisher, which was kind of dumb. Now, the cool thing is, first publisher I went to said, wow, do you want a 10-book deal? Which is extremely rare. And I thought, what in the heck? And that's when it clicked with me that maybe some other people would benefit a lot from the story. Again, a regular guy who has challenges like a reluctant wife. And I just started describing what I saw happening in the future, a partial collapse, stuff getting grungy, stuff we're seeing right now. A number of predictions, soft predictions, have come true from the books, I got to say. So that's what I did. And to my great surprise, it was extremely well received and very, very popular in the prepping community because people tell me it's real. The dialogue is like me and my friends and how we talk. It's not made up. It's no SEAL Team 6 stuff. It's no zombie stuff. It's real dudes, men and women, in real situations. And that's why I think it's been so popular. And I love it. I mean, complete surprise. Never thought I'd be talking to you on this show, for example.
Well, I tell you, for complete clarity, I just downloaded it on Audible today. I really can't wait to get listening to it. The title character's name is Grant, which is my son's name. So, good. Yeah, I'm gonna put him as the protagonist in your story because he's a great dude. So, Glen, like you said, I think when did the first book come out? Preparation, did it come out in 2012?
It did, August 31st, 2012.
Okay, so like you said, you had some predictions. I mean, we're talking about almost 10 years ago. So you were looking into your crystal ball, and I'm going to ask you that later in the show. What do you see as our future? Because I think you did predict some things. And what is the state of the union right now, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are feeling it and seeing it, and there's no mystery now. Now, that being said, a couple years ago, when I was saying that there's going to be political disorder, there's going to be widespread perception of corruption at high levels, like the election results. There's going to be hyper-violent left-wing groups and all of these things. That sounded kind of crazy a couple years ago. It's headlines today, so I don't think I need to convince anybody listening to this about what the state of the union is. I can say that I saw these things coming just because of two things: a breakdown of America, and then also I'm no historian, but I just look around the world and I see Bosnia, Argentina, the Russian inflation situation, and so I just took basic human behavior and what happens in these situations and applied it to America. And so, but the State of the Union, to focus on that, I think we're going to have another violent summer. Again, I'm leaving Washington State. I don't live in Seattle, thank goodness. I live in very rural Washington State. That was an eye opener for a lot of people, and for me, I was like popping popcorn and like, oh, it took this long. We're going to see that. We're going to see hyperinflation, inflation, I should be fair, possibly hyperinflation. The continuing, and the word I came up with a good friend of mine, who's a private military contractor and special operations dude, guy named Sean Swanson, the cartelification of America. And I don't mean snap of a finger, it's war as Mexico in Toledo, Ohio. That's an exaggeration. That's too bold and strong. But the basic hallmarks of a cartelified hollow state, a failed state like Mexico, is that the government's corrupt. Nobody really believes them. Nobody really listens to them. Yet they have tremendous power. They can snap their fingers and throw people in horrible prisons. There are business entities that are supplying things that people want. By the way, the cartels, they're de facto governments. I mean, they govern huge swaths of Mexico. They pave the roads. They provide education. They provide healthcare. And so it's an insurgency and a governing structure all at the same time. And I'm not sure it'll get that bad in America, but the hollow state is a really good phrase for it. I mean, yeah, on the outside, it looks like a government, but it really can't do much. The political stuff is off the charts. It looks like Biden's going to try some crazy gun control stuff. Pistol braces is the latest thing. I'm not a believer that there'll be like a midnight raid across the country and they're going to take all the guns, because I don't think they could pull it off. I think they'd love to. I just don't think they could pull it off. So we're going to see a continued grinding down. It's going to be a lot like Argentina before their hyperinflation. I think there is not an ethnic or racial part to this, but I think there's a perfect analogy would be Yugoslavia. Now, they had ethnic areas, enclaves, and ethnic fighting based on ethnic hatreds that were hundreds of years old. I don't see that, but what I do see is I see the territorial aspect to that, and that is red states and blue states, and if you break it down some more, red and blue parts of red and blue states. And I think you're going to have areas, regions, parts of states. I'm not sure exactly how it'll shake out in a practical way. Nobody's going to look at state boundaries and say, oh, I guess I got to be a liberal because I'm in Washington State. Nobody's going to say that. There'll be conservative parts of blue states and pockets of liberalism in red states. And they're going to band together, and they're going to more and more say, why would we care what's going on in D.C.? Oh, you want to ban pistol braces? Come and get it. I mean, how many ATF agents do you have in Idaho? 4? Okay. Why don't you guys do your little thing? You're not going to have any coordination with local police. In fact, some locals may really not appreciate you very much. I'm going to leave it at that. So the laws are on the books, just like in Mexico, right? It's illegal to own guns in Mexico, but the cartels seem to, have 12-year-old kids with AKs walking around right by the police, and nothing happens.
There's one gun store in Mexico.
Yeah, one gun store. Isn't that on an army base? On an army base,
yes.
Yeah, 38.
People don't know that.
Yeah.
And how many guns do they sell a year or a month? It's like 38 or something like that. And yet they're in the Narco Wars that's still going on. There's like 70,000 dead right on our southern border.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Most Americans don't have any clue.
Yeah, no, and they should. It's a tremendous humanitarian crisis, and it's right there, and it's spreading. The cartels are operating in the United States more and more, and they're doing more and more of the stuff that they've been doing in Mexico. And that was another storyline in 299 days. Apparently something about a border being easy to walk through and a big wave of refugees, and who saw that coming? So I don't mean to get into too much detail, but to answer your question, State of the Union, inflation, cartelification on a very slow roll, and hollowed out state, and a really accelerated divide between red areas and blue areas, to the point at which red and blue areas don't really follow common laws anymore. It's like, this is how we do it in Montana, so I don't even care what you think, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And
that'll be interesting. And so we're seeing that, and it's not good. I mean, eventually I think things turn out okay. That's a whole different half-hour discussion. But so I'm not a pessimist by any means, but we're declining, and then we're going to get our stuff together. Specifically, I'll give you a preview since you asked. I think the red areas are going to be just fine, and the red areas are going to say, we don't care about you blue areas. The blue areas will be even bigger, more horrible basket cases. There will be refugees from blue areas trying to get into red areas. And I think the red areas will do just fine. And quite honestly, I don't care about the blue areas anymore. I don't care about your quality of life. You guys did it to yourself. You've destroyed Seattle, which was a beautiful place. You've turned it into a garbage pit. I really don't care about you anymore. So I'm going to a red state, super red county in a red state, and y'all can deal with it in blue states however you want. It's not my concern anymore.
Now, well said. And I think the cartelification or balkanization of America, whichever one we're going to face, may be a combination. And your point about, this idea that the fleeing that's going to go on. And I think that the examples are there in plethora for people that are open to see this. I'll give you two, for example, and Glenn, you can check me if I'm wrong here. But with Venezuela's economic collapse, guess what's happening on the Colombian border? People are fleeing. Zimbabwe, hyperinflation, economic collapse. They flee to South Africa. And then once those people get down there, they want more free stuff, and they destroy South Africa, etc. And I think that could happen here in America, and because human nature is what it is. Would you agree with that, Glenn?
Absolutely. Yeah, people are people, no matter what color they are, no matter what time in history. There's some very basic human traits. You just have to be looking for it. And America, while the greatest nation on earth, period, ever in history, no question about it, we're not that different. I mean, we're human beings, and the same laws apply to us. We've just had it pretty good for a while. And you can't ever say, well, that could never happen because this is America. You just can't say that anymore.
No, and I had a friend of mine, I put a meme up that someone shared, and it had a giant crate full of wedding rings, and it was a black and white photo. You may have seen this, Glenn, and somebody's kind of running their hands through it. It's like how many love stories were ended in the gas furnaces or something like this, and a guy that I was in the Marine Corps with, went to combat with, was like, I can't believe you would even juxtapose this with America. And I'm like, you think there's something special here? The stages of genocide are there, and we've walked up to the stages of genocide a few times in history, whether it's placing the Japanese Americans in internment camps or the Native Americans. We have done it right up to the point where we started mass extermination. So to think that there's something special in our experiment here in America and the dollar cannot ever fall here, I think is somewhat of a logical fallacy, but I'll turn it over to you as the expert, Glenn.
Yeah, by the way, as far as genocide and Native Americans go, I'm an enrolled citizen of the Creek Indian Nation that was forcibly removed from Georgia, Trail of Tears, 1820s, 1830s, super horrible stuff. I don't expect free stuff, and I don't harbor any grudges and all of that. I'm not very Indian, to be very honest with you, but it is a real thing. And maybe that's one of the reasons I kind of get this, is because every time my mom would see Andrew Jackson on a $20 bill, she'd get mad. So anyway, because he did it. But anyway, back to the inflation stuff, I think is what you were getting at. Absolutely. It's economic distress, and it usually is inflation that is the distress. Unravels all kinds of stuff. Classic example, the early, 2012, the early 20-teens. Is that what we're going to call that decade? Anyway, the Arab Spring. Well, how did that start? Bread prices, food prices go up, and all of a sudden that was kind of cruising along, and everything was kind of cool, and people were putting up with different races and sects and ethnicities and stuff. Happened in Yugoslavia too. Once there's an economic problem, now the gloves come off, and people aren't just cool with each other anymore. And so I see that happening in the United States. Candidly, I've been wrong about something. I thought inflation would hit sooner, but it didn't. But it clearly has. We have a real inflation rate of at least 11 or 12%. The Federal Reserve says 2 to 4, and tomorrow they're going to maybe make an announcement that it's 5 or 6. They don't count housing prices in that. They don't count car prices. So according to the Federal Reserve, when they calculate inflation, there's been no rise in housing prices or rents since 1990. when they counted it a different way. And there's been no increase in car prices since 1990. So that's just bunk. See, that's the hollowing out. That's the cartelification, where people look at what the government says and they go, that's bunk. That is just 100% not true. So inflation means that stuff's going to get scarce. Wages never go up as quickly as prices, right? So it's a quality of life issue. Inflation, if it gets really bad, steals everybody's life savings. With inflation, it's great to be in debt and it's terrible to have any savings. What is that? A giant wealth transfer. And so the people that had savings, that worked really hard, look at the people that went into debt, and now the debt they have to pay back is with cheap money. So they, make money. I mean, if your mortgage is 3% and the inflation rate's 12%, you're golden, right? Unless they rewrite the mortgage rules, which they probably will. But so then it makes people really mad. I worked my whole life and now it's worth a cup of coffee, but you bums, you just you get all this stuff and the free stuff from the government and all this stuff. It creates a lot of tension. And so the smoothing over that was there goes away. And then people in America, just like everywhere else on earth, are going to go after each other. Might be subtle. It might not be. And it's going to vary. That's one of the other things about the way I see things. Things vary greatly regionally. There are different cultures and subcultures in the United States. Some people are more peaceful and accepting, and others are more violent. It's just the way it is. So there's going to be variations in that. But I think inflation is really the thing that, politically speaking, people understand inflation. When they go to the store and prices go up, they get it. You start talking to them about capital gains taxes or tariffs, and they're like, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. Whatever. What's the price of gas? Well, I'm glad you asked. The price of gas went way up, as you know, every couple of days when you fill up your tank. So the inflation is where the masses are figuring out that there's some real problems in this country. And that's what I think gets the tension and the divisiveness really rolling. And it's really hard to stop it once it gets going. And that's my point.
Yeah, totally. Let's welcome some folks onto the show, Glenn. My lovely bride, Miss Lisa, is on. Good evening, ma'am. Razmik is on. Let's see. Walt is on. Jared is on. We know Jared out there in Montana. Thanks for putting Jared together.
Yes. Hey, Jared.
Let's see. Gordon is on up there in Ohio. Coin number 1688. Dr. T.C. Fuller, who's a retired FBI agent, says, quote, "This is how we do things in Montana. Indeed, the balkanization of our nation has begun. Drug laws, immigration laws, gun laws. What's next?" And that's one of the things that I definitely want to hit on before I welcome a couple more folks on. Jeff Couch says, "The exodus is in full effect here in Kentucky. I meet folks every single day from California." And Jay Fujimoto, my good friend out there in Hawaii, says, "Good evening, gents. Please like and share. We are just getting started with Glen. And if you're not familiar with Glen's face, which many of you aren't, but you're familiar with, but you're familiar, but you're familiar with his products, which is he is the best-selling author of 299 Days, as well as the host with his wife Shelby of Prepping 2.0. So please like and hit that share button. Let's unpack what Dr. Fuller is saying there, if we can, Glen. That is, we have states refusing to comply with gun laws, immigration laws, drug laws. Where is that going?
Oh, it's going to accelerate. And the cool thing is, it used to be a handful of states would not comply with these things. And by the way, I'm going to be fair here, even though I disagree with California politicians on every possible issue. If they want to buck the federal tide, I guess if Montana gets to, California gets to also. Now, I have huge policy disagreements. I think it's incredibly reckless for California not to work with ICE to detain horrible criminals. So I'm not okay with what California is doing. But my point is that more and more states, and so it used to be like one state would do this and another state would do this. Now we have blocks. Look at virtually any issue where red states are saying adios to the federal government on issues. Masks, the extra $300 to stay on unemployment. All these issues, recent ones that have been in the news, it's usually the same 22 to 24 states. Look at the states that joined in the lawsuit that Texas filed against Pennsylvania to have the U.S. Supreme Court look at the election results, it's the same block of states over and over again. And it's not just one or two, it's about half the states. And you see this over and over again. About half the states are not just red in the sense of the way they vote, they're red in the way they govern. Look at Florida. Florida does stuff. I'm convinced, I can't prove it, that all these red state governors like have a conference call once a week. And they're like, okay, Florida, you're going to outlaw transgendered sports stuff. And then next week, Montana's going to take the $300 thing. And then the week after that, South Dakota, you're going to declare Second Amendment sanctuary status. And see, this is not good for the federal government, for about half the states. And I'm kidding about the conference call, but I actually think something like that happens, to basically be united and coordinating in thwarting the federal government. And then what do you see in the blue states? The doubling down. Check my stats. Google this if you want. The governor of Oregon, Kate Brown, who's a monster, has said the mask mandate's going to be permanent. Why? Yes. The vaccine works, doesn't it? So you have the blue states doubling down. In my state of Washington, my soon-to-be former state, there's a doubling down. There's new gun stuff. There's new tax stuff. And so the red and the blue are getting farther and farther apart, and they're organized. And this does not bode well for a federal government. Ask the Yugoslav federal government how that worked out when they had territories and states and provinces uniting and doing their own things. And that's where I think this is headed, not exactly the Yugoslav Civil War, something akin to it. I think it's going to get violent. I don't know how violent. And I certainly hope it doesn't, by the way. I mean, I'd love to be wrong. Wouldn't it be great 5 years from now, somebody plays this and they're like, man, that Glen Tate guy, he was all goofed up. He must have been on chemo chemicals. He was like talking about violence and stuff. Luckily, that didn't happen and everything's cool. Love to be wrong, everybody. Love to be wrong.
Well, yeah. And back in 1992, when I was a young Marine out there in the Mediterranean, we were involved in Operation Provide Promise in the Balkan Wars. And again, if you don't know your history, you are absolutely doomed to repeat it, folks. I say this again and again. We can look at the trends, the voting trends, and the way things were going in the 1840s and 50s that led to the Civil War here in America. And I think we look back at it now with it has a certain patina that probably did not exist in the day in which it happened, because it seems to be relatively, it was just about slavery, end of story. You don't need to know anything else, skip to the next chapter. When in reality, President Buchanan's vice president with a guy named John Breckinridge, and he thought, wait a minute, states do have a right to secede. They're the one, so I don't know how you feel about those kind of issues, Glenn, but he goes and works for the Confederacy, becomes a general, and President Tyler, the former president of the United States, says that this is wrong, that the federal government does not have these rights. And so President Tyler becomes a congressman to the Confederacy. I say all this because there are plenty of people out there that goes, these things cannot happen in America. They have happened. Hyperinflation has happened here in America to the Confederate States of America to the tune of, and it depends on what scholar you look at, 7,000% or 15,000%, maybe higher. But trust me when I say, folks, that everything Glenn's talking about today is not some sort of red state fantasy. This is absolute real. It has happened around the world. It's happened here, and it can and may happen again. And like I said, I hope I'm wrong.
I want to emphasize, you said, this isn't some red state fantasy. I cannot stress enough that I would love to be wrong. And here's what I'd really love specifically. Get to relax a little bit, be a country lawyer in Montana, ride around in my side-by-side, shoot guns, go hunting, horseback, and everything's cool. I want a peaceful life. I'm not the kind of guy that's ginning up anything because I'm an observer to this. I've had this conversation with some interesting people, and I've said, listen, it's like global warming. Let's assume it exists, which it doesn't. I can't change the temperature of the earth. I can only observe things. I can't change the trajectory of history in the United States. I can just observe things. I'm not an active participant. I'm not trying to speed up a collapse. I'm not trying to slow down a collapse. I'm just a guy observing some stuff, and I have the honor on occasion of being on really cool podcasts like yours. That's all it is. I'm not doing anything. I'm observing.
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you, brother. You know, my loyalty is to my family and our little farm here in East Tennessee. You know, one of the things you alluded to a moment ago, ethnic division, you know, we see Jews getting attacked here in America, which is absolutely disgusting. We see the Asian community getting attacked. And I remember last year when the sparks of COVID were starting to fly late January, early February, people laughed at me because I was putting these things to put up 2x6 so that people couldn't come through my doors. Like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, let's extrapolate on this. If we're going to have some level of a pandemic, whether real or imagined, okay, all we need is one little flashpoint for things to run away with itself. So to you, like you said, you know, when you started writing this series, you didn't necessarily want to be prophetic. You know, I don't think that was your intent, was it, Glenn?
No, absolutely not.
No. Now let's talk about hyperinflation, because you said, I don't want to misquote you here, Glenn, but you said maybe not true economic 101 hyperinflation, but some level of that. Tell us more about that. What are your predictions there?
Yeah, we're currently in an inflationary cycle. Obviously, everybody knows it, looking at prices, and it's bad, but it's moderate. I'll go with the 11 or 12% figure that I think is pretty accurate. And that's kind of bad. That's the 70s, basically. Now, the 70s was weird because they had stagflation. So they had a stagnant economy, but prices were going up, which means wages aren't going up because the economy is stagnant, but prices are going up. A lot of that had to do with the oil embargo and a bunch of other stuff. This isn't the economics hour, so I'll just leave it at that. We could be heading into a version of stagflation because the Biden policies are so idiotic. The regulation, the taxes, I mean, cutting off pipelines, doing just absolutely inane, crazy stuff, you know, kind of like canceling cancer screenings if, you know, in the healthcare context. But anyway, just doing dumb stuff, making the economy really, really hard to be prosperous in. And I think we've seen that with paying people to stay home. Now we're paying them to go back to work, and all these just crazy liberal, it's not even liberal, it's socialist, dumb stuff. So it could be stagflation. Hyperinflation is, and I'm no economist, but again, you were in Bosnia, you know what this is all about, or the Balkans, pardon me. Actually, there's a difference. But hyperinflation is, you know, instead of 11% a year, it's like 11% a month, 11% a week, 11% a day. And then you start getting the crazy things like the Weimar Republic, the infamous wheelbarrow full of cash. They leave it outside and people throw the cash away and steal the wheelbarrow. We're not there, and I don't want to exaggerate. We're not in Wheelbarrowville, right? We're not there yet. So I'm very careful to not, to the extent I can, be accurate and not exaggerate. So we're not at hyperinflation, because hyperinflation, where a cup of coffee is $400 and your wages haven't gone up, right? All the gloves come off. It's just open. It's gang warfare at that point. It is tribal in the sense of people huddling together, maybe on ethnic lines, maybe on neighborhood lines. I mean, it's full on, you know, prepper novel stuff other than mine. I mean, the full on collapse and the craziness. That's what happens with that. We're not there yet. We may not get there. We may get there. I don't know. It just depends on how reckless and crazy the government is. Very short version of this. The government, the Federal Reserve, it's kind of the government, has to raise interest rates to like 11% to soak up all the extra money. If they had an interest rate of 11%, home mortgages would be like 15 or 16. Can't do that. The national debt would go up trillions of dollars a year, and then it would keep expanding, compounding interest and all. It's math. You can't fight it. So there's no way that they can raise interest rates to soak up the inflation. There's going to be at least 11% inflation, probably more. The question is, does it become 1,100% inflation? And when hyperinflation is raging, crazy stuff happens. We did a great show. We did a couple shows, actually. One of them was with an Argentinian guy named Fairfall, who's famous. He wrote a book about his life in Argentina. And he describes, you know, people would buy multiples of stuff even though they didn't need it, because the next week the price would be really high. Maybe somebody needed it and they would barter. The whole bartering world and all of that other stuff, we're going to see increasingly more common. Ammunition, guys, ammunition is going to be barterable like you can't even believe. I have a little bit, and like 22 long rifle is for making change, and then there's 5.56 and 9 and oddball calibers. We're going to see fresh chicken eggs become barterable. All these kinds of things we're going to see, and it may not be the end of the world. There probably still be supermarkets, but maybe a cup of coffee is $400. Maybe you're making $200 an hour. I don't know, but it's not going to be normal. That's the thing. Everybody listening to me probably is already okay with this, but if you're not, please listen. Normalcy bias, thinking that everything's going to be the way it always is, always has been. You got to get rid of that. You may be making $200 an hour and have $400 cups of coffee. Normalcy bias fits into all the self-defense stuff covered by you guys about situational awareness, and that nice looking granny may be the one with the sawed off who's actually robbing the store, that kind of stuff. So you got to lose normalcy bias and quit thinking it's 1988 where everything's cool, because it ain't.
No, it certainly isn't. And, you know, if there's some really interesting documentaries about hyperinflation in Venezuela, and one of the things that they do, Glenn, to try to control the run on the food is like whatever they call their Social Security card. You have to show up to the grocery store, and let's say you probably know this, Glenn, but this is for those that are watching or listening that don't. You have to show up to the grocery store, show your Social Security card with my little face on it, and my last digit is 1 on my Social Security card. So I only get to shop on Monday. And I hope you don't need anything till next Monday. Or to your point, maybe I need eggs, and I tell my neighbor whose Social Security number ends in 2, can you pick me up some eggs? And I'll trade you some 5.56. I mean, it is. And one of the documentaries I watch, I don't know if you've seen some of these, but it's like they show a visit to a Burger King in Caracas, and nobody's eating in there. And the guy goes up to talk to the people like, yeah, you're the first real customer we've had in 6 weeks, literally. And they fry him one, and they're not even using potatoes because a potato's worth its weight in gold. They've using something else that looks like a potato. It gets weird, guys. And to your point about the normalcy bias, man, to think that it will not happen. I mean, Venezuela is sitting on probably the greatest resources in the world. They got oil reserves like nobody else. And yet look what they've done to their economy in such a short time. And one final thing to your point about the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic was slowly coming, and then it just took off like this. So while we may see a slow roll, it's 2% to 6% to 11%. Next thing you know, it goes through the roof, because your point earlier about, and we've done a show on economic collapse. And I've studied a little bit. I'm no economist, but what Paul Volcker had to do to kill stagflation with rising interest rate, Jerome Powell and Biden and nobody is probably going to let that happen, because to your point, it's math. You can't do that. You're going to kill the economy to try to stop what may happen. And I just think that they're not going to do that. So I'll finish that little dry diatribe with, what is a hedge against inflation? Is it crypto? Is it real estate? Is it gold? Is it ammo? What is it, brother?
I think it's all that stuff. It is hard assets that you can actually own. You know, paper gold, that a contract that says you get to have gold 6 months from now at a certain price isn't anything. I'm a huge proponent of gold and silver. Obviously, don't like cash out everything you have and buy gold and silver. I'm not a financial planner. We've done a couple shows. I highly commend them. A couple of Prepping 2.0 shows on gold and silver. I've been a customer of a gold and silver company. I won't mention, this isn't like an advertisement or anything. Super trusted people. You should listen to our shows and find out who it is, because they can't take it away. You have it. It is phenomenal barter. It stores value. A $2,000 1 ounce coin roughly today is locking in $2,000 worth of value. When the dollar's worth a tenth of what it is now, later, the gold will be $20,000 an ounce, roughly. I mean, roughly. And so you're just capturing the value. You're not going to make money on it. Ammunition is terrific. Of course, there's the warning that always goes with that. Be careful who you sell or trade ammunition with, because it may come back at you in a very hot form. So there's that. I don't know much, and I don't dabble in cryptos. I kind of follow it and know it, but I've not jumped into it because, to me, it still requires electricity, still requires the internet, and I just can't imagine the federal government or world government, if governments working together, would allow it if it were really a way to get around all of this. Real estate is good in certain places, obviously not a condo in Seattle, right? But I think that is a good thing. So there are and food, yes, food. Long-term storage food doesn't have to be freeze-dried, can be just, cans of chili. That stores value. Guns obviously store value. Things store value. Things that you're going to use, right? I mean, I'm not going to buy art or something like that, and you can start doing that now. You're never going to buy, a case of number 10 tins of chili that lasts like 20, 30 years probably. You're never going to buy those and 5 years later while you're eating them and the price of that tin of chili's gone up tenfold. You're never going to say, geez, I wish I wouldn't have bought this chili. I wish I would have bought, I don't know, Doritos, or bought some Netflix movies, or vaped, or whatever it is, the other thing you're going to do. In my state, buy a bunch of weed, I guess, Star Wars memorabilia, whatever it might be. So there's a lot of, again, non-traditional ways, because when you get rid of your normalcy bias, you start thinking in terms like you just mentioned, like gold and silver. Never owned gold and silver before, but maybe there's a reason to. Real estate. I never really thought of myself as a real estate investor, but if you have it in bank accounts and 401ks and even possibly in cash, like $100 bills, the value is going to go away. If you want an example of how that can happen, specifically the bank account restrictions, look at what happened in Greece and Cyprus in about, 2012, 13, 14. They just said, okay, you can only get $300 a day out of the ATM, and there were long lines at the ATM. Anything that you have in an institution, it's like a bank, 401k, mutual fund, it's zeros and ones, and they control whether you get it back. And that's just not secure enough. You know what? It worked perfectly well a decade ago. It really did. I'm not like, oh, I hate banks and I'm going to put all this cash under my pillow and all. I'm not crazy. I'm just adaptive. And why am I adaptive? Because I don't have normalcy bias. And everyone listening should similarly not have normalcy bias and start thinking about how to fight inflation in non-traditional ways. And yes, it's a shameless plug. We have a great show on hyperinflation. We have a second show on inflation and 2 shows on gold and silver. And I guess the 5th show would be the one with Fairfall from Argentina, where he describes in stories about what happened in his life, everything we're talking about. So get ready for that, guys. Don't be the guy. Don't be the one stuck, holding the bag. It's like, oh, I got all this money in a 401k. And now there's a new regulation that says my 401k needs to buy U.S. Treasury notes. Why do they need to buy U.S. Treasury notes? Because no one else in the world will. Because the inflation rate is 11% and the bonds only pay 1.5%. Nobody in their right mind is going to buy the bonds. So the government forces 401ks to. Stuff like that. I'm trying not to make this an economics thing.
No, I agree with you. But for those of us watching today that have spent a lot of time in third world countries, you've seen some of this. You've traded your, I would go out in the Philippines during the coup back in like 89, 90. And I could go out, Glenn, and party all night long, eat all I want, take all the taxis I want, go to any part of the city, engage in whatever you want with $5 and come back with change in my pocket, because of the devaluation of their dollar. And, or be in a place where car bombs just go off all the time. I was talking to my brother, and he was overseas doing some stuff with a group, and I heard this blast in the background. It's like, what was that? I was like, it's just a car bomb, man. I'm out here on my balcony. I just saw this thing blow up. I'm like, holy cow. So, I mean, But if you've been around the world, you've been in some of that stuff, you hopefully have shed some of the normalcy bias. If you're new to this kind of stuff, you really need to pay attention to what Glen is saying, because it can come here, and there's some ways that you can protect yourself and your family. And let's talk about EMPs. Mm-hmm. And I know that you've discussed that quite some time, but I would say, Glen, that with the ransomware attacks that we're seeing, we may not even need an EMP to get the same level of effect. Am I wrong in that?
No, you're exactly right. And of course, an EMP is an electromagnetic pulse from a nuclear detonation high up that sends a pulse of electrons and fries everything. There's also solar mass or coronal mass ejections from the sun, which are also a thing. I mean, it's natural; it's not man-made, and they can come and go at any time. And they've actually fried out stuff. There's the Carrington event. What was it, 1854? And all the telegraph lines were like on fire because the wires soaked up so much heat that came from the sun. But anyway, that is a huge problem. And we're affiliated with EMP Shield, which is a product that you wire into something and it's been tested and it stops the EMP pulse. You need to wire it into, a generator or your house or a vehicle. It's kind of only a one at a time thing. So it's not a magic. It's not like a big, bubble over your house or something like that. And that could be a huge problem. It would be pretty easy, I think, for North Korea just to pop one of those things. Kind of surprised they haven't. So that's a huge problem. One of the things with EMPs, and I'm a positive guy and I'm all about preparations, but I got to say I'm very fatalistic when it comes to an EMP. If an EMP were done like has been theorized, one or two over the central United States and the entire CONUS, basically continental U.S., is without electricity, there's no coming back from that. I mean, it's gangland. It's the worst, most savage, crazy, out of control prepper scenario you can think of. They talk about a 90% kill off. I think it'd be like 97 or something. I mean, it would be just terrible. So I don't want to be a defeatist, but I don't really have any preparations against an EMP because I just have normal stuff, and I don't know that you can fully prepare for it. And then you mentioned ransomware. Boy, that is something that really has taken the stage with the JBS beef processing facility. Of course, the Colonial Pipeline thing. All it would take would be a threat to the internet. And then I think, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I really am not, because conspiracies with thousands of people are just too hard to pull off. I mean, it's not like people don't want to do horrible things. It's just that it's hard to pull off. And so if there are bad people in government who have seen how quarantines work and how lockdowns work, and they've conditioned society to think that you've got to quarantine, for a virus. Well, you could do the same thing to a threat to the internet. Hey, we got to turn off the internet because it could be a way of spreading this virus, this computer virus. There's no pun intended. I mean, they're very similar, methodologically, but I could see the government then controlling the internet under the guise of protecting us from this sort of thing. That could be something you would do if inflation were going crazy and people were at each other's throats. Someone in government could say, just time out. We're just going to shut things down and see what happens and try to, I don't know. It's crazy that they would do it, but I see grid attacks, however you want to call them, as a really, really big problem. We all know that there's no perfect defense against it because we've got the little stuff, the colonial. That wasn't so little on the East Coast. No gasoline for a few days. You know what? Shelby mentioned this to me this morning. This is what we talk about in bed when we get up because we're weirdos, right? She goes, "Hey, I was reading this thing in the Colonial Pipeline thing. They couldn't manually turn the system back on. I guess physically turn, valves or whatever, because all the people who knew how to do it manually were either retired or dead, and the younger folks manning the system." It was all computers. And you think about that example, and I could see that being a huge problem. We're so reliant on computers. There's no redundancy. Nobody knows how to turn valves. Obviously, you got to turn them in the right sequence. I'm not making it sound like somebody couldn't just, flip a valve around. But I see that as being a really huge problem. You could, as an evil government, if you were an evil government, it's a perfect tool. It's like, Oh, Montana, you guys are getting uppity. Your electricity just got turned off. Let us, and by the way, Saddam Hussein did this. He was the master of this. It's like when you guys get rid of this nonsense about having a Second Amendment sanctuary state, you let us know, oh, it's the middle of winter? Yeah. And you get your electricity back on. Now, do I think that's going to happen? No. Do I think everyone in the government is that evil? No. Is it a magnificent, marvelous, practical way to control a rebel territory? It sure is. That's part of the 299 Days book. It's called the Cracker Corral, Operation Cracker Corral. I'll let people read about it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good stuff, man, because and I know we've got about 30 minutes left with you, Glenn, so I want to use that time wisely. So I'm going to skip some of the questions that I had. Maybe we'll do a round two if you're up for it someday.
Oh, I'd love to.
Good, man, because I look at, as the states continue to do things that are not in conformity with the federal government, I look at, like, I can't see this large scale Civil War type shooting war. Of course, I'm a Southerner. The legacy of invading armies coming through our territories is still fresh in the minds of many of us, even though we're several generations removed. But it's something that did happen here, and the signposts on every other street corner are a legacy of that. But I don't see that. I think you're more right. I think if there was ever a soft Civil War, which we may be heading into something like a cold Civil War, I'll let you talk about that with the red state, blue state, and the blocks of states and the balkanization, et cetera. But I think that's probably a better way to bring states to heel, is whether it's, we're going to turn on and turn off dollars. We're going to turn off and turn on gas pipelines that run through your state, et cetera. So I think that gives that Leviathan some options.
Well, but it goes both ways. You're exactly right. I guess you were agreeing with me. So, I mean, I was right. No, I'm just kidding. But yes, the Leviathan can turn off electricity, but the red states have some stuff to turn off too, like food, like knowing how to fix stuff. I'm serious. Not a lot of, we have an Airbnb, and we have a lot of guests from Seattle in our very rural part of Washington State. You would be amazed at what they can't do. I mean, it's unbelievable. Literally could not turn on a light switch. Not exaggerating. It was a little bit sticky. You would not believe the ineptitude and the lack of practicality among deep blue city people. And so when I say they need people to fix their stuff, I'm not kidding. They need people to fix their stuff. But with the food, the truckers, what if the truckers all just operate within red states? So there's going to be back and forth. And also the blue states, let's say they have a utility system and power lines. I'm not the first to think of this, and I'm not advocating it, but it's pretty obvious. A couple good old boys with some 270 bolt actions and hitting insulators can knock out power systems every single day. They get fixed, they get knocked out again. This is not hard. This is
it's been done in California. It's been done, right?
Exactly. Yeah. with an AK on a substation, as a matter of fact. And in Arizona, they physically cut some internet lines. So it would go back and forth, and I think life would just become miserable because of all the disruptions and the shortages. I think you'd have gangs and quasi-gangs supplying stuff. You know, there are good gangs and bad gangs, and I talk about that in the 299 Days book. You know, some of the self-protection units, the team, real guys, my real friends, why they let, like, a lawyer like me on this team to do this stuff, I don't even know why, but they're good gangs. You know, they have all the hallmarks of a gang, except they're doing good stuff. So that would be the spicy, complicated situation in life that would be varying region to region. But if, you know, when it is all said and done, if I had to be a good old boy in Montana or a software developer who relies on sushi being flown in, you know, from Japan every day in Seattle, I'd rather be the Montana good old boy. And I think that's why eventually the red areas win. It's not going to be pleasant. You're right. Large scale shooting wars, I just don't think we have it in us. I really don't think we do, which is kind of good because I don't want a large scale shooting war. But, and you mentioned cutting off, you know, power. Maybe I mentioned it. There would start to be dams that would start to appear. There would start to be local small scale energy things. I think the blue states might, if they could figure out how to turn on light switches, and I'm only being halfway sarcastic, they might start building up their own separate, somewhat self-sufficient, regionally self-sufficient things. And then you've really got just an accelerated divide. And maybe the states actually technically stay together. It's just nobody like listens to it anymore. You know what I mean? I mean, it's like, yeah, part of the U.S. and we all have the same zip code system, but those people in Seattle better not come here because their car will get shot up. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Speaking of cars getting shot up, let's talk about, I was going to talk to you about the Second Amendment, but I think it may be a better way to encapsulate some of the things we see going on is, you know, the Supreme Court recently announced, Glenn, that they would hear the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Corlett. And it has the potentiality to reshape our understanding of the Second Amendment and what it means to be armed in our community. What are your thoughts on this?
I can't trust the United States Supreme Court anymore after the election decision, which was a pathetic disaster on a lot of levels that don't matter for your question. But it was jaw-dropping how unprincipled that was. And that turned on a light in my head. I was always the one, everyone else would be like, it's all rigged. And I was like, well, no, technically we have this one pathway and we could do this Rule 37 thing. You know, I was like the technician on that. That all went away in December of 2020. So, on this topic, Heller and McDonald, all about defending home and hearth. And it always talked about staying inside your house. You had the right to defend your house. And they would always say, we're not going to decide the other parts. That's more the keeping arms. It's bearing arms too, right? Yeah. There's keeping and bearing. There's two verbs in that thing. Mm-hmm. And this would obviously, carrying a pistol, not having to show proper cause, whatever that means, to be able to carry a pistol would be bearing arms. So it's an opportunity, bottom line, it's an opportunity for the Supreme Court to do some good Second Amendment stuff, and maybe they do. But it couldn't get any worse than it currently is, right? If the Supreme Court says, you don't have a right to carry a pistol, well, in the blue states, you already don't have the ability to carry a pistol. In the red states, they'll just say, well, that's a very interesting federal law, but under the Constitution of Wyoming, we do get a carry. And not only do we get a carry, we don't require a permit. And so that's very interesting, United States Supreme Court. But see, that's the thing people need to understand about federal court rulings. It just sets the floor. And then other states can provide more rights. And it used to be other states didn't provide more rights because we were all one big happy family, 50 stars, all hanging out. Everybody was cool, same stuff. And you mentioned at the very beginning of the show how some states are, nullifying this and not following that. So there's nowhere to go but up. And I wish I could trust the Supreme Court and start counting votes, but very disappointed in that. It would be magnificent. We've had some glimmers of good news. Of course, last week we had a California federal judge striking down California's 32-year ban on so-called assault rifles. We'll see what the Ninth Circuit does, but all is not lost, but it's just you can't count on the courts, right? I mean, occasionally we get lucky, but with different states, right, it doesn't matter because I was only halfway kidding about there being 4 ATF agents in Idaho. There's a little kernel of truth to that. There's probably more than that. But if Idaho says you can have whatever you want, and it's against the law for state and local officials or law enforcement or anybody to work with the feds have to have state and local support on all their task forces. I know this from friends of mine who are federal law enforcement officers. They'll tell you that. And without that local support, they can't do anything. They can do some high visibility stuff. And I don't know, maybe like, well, it wouldn't happen in Tennessee. They're not going to arrest you. But I mean, they could do some flashy stuff like that, but that's about it. So that's what I'm thinking about the Second Amendment at the federal level. Looking to D.C., looking to the Supreme Court to save us, not that you are, is, I think, problematic. Even if, let me put it this way, because here's now what I do all day long for my real job, and that's the suing the government thing. Even if the United States Supreme Court said, hey, every state in America, listen up. You have to allow constitutional carry. Let's just dream big and say that's what they say. New York just won't do it. They just won't do it. And then you got to go to court, and then they'll do what Washington State does and say, well, in this one case with this one guy, with this one application for this one concealed thing, yeah, we agree to let him have it. So they get out of the court case. And they never, the bad blue states never fully carry out good federal rulings. They just choose not to, and they get away with it. They're not going to get voted out of office. A state judge or a federal judge isn't going to throw the governor of the state of Washington in jail for contempt of court. It's a freebie. You get to ignore federal law, and you get reelected. Why wouldn't you if you were in a blue state?
Well, and, you know, if red states start nullifying certain things, then, like you said, to your point, you know, we could see things going the other way, because I mean, I live in Tennessee. I can't imagine them following some sort of, you know, if we lose this case, I just think it'll be completely ignored. And to the point where I guess the Civil War is on my mind, because I studied it for probably about a dozen years or so and read about everything I could. And I just see some parallels here. Like, yeah, we're not going to follow this federal law. As a matter of fact, go ahead and tell your ATF agents they got to the end of the month, pack up their crap and get out of our state. Matter of fact, let's go ahead and shut down those federal buildings. These are essentially what happened. And Fort Sumter was left standing. And, you know, Major Anderson was told to just hold off there. And the Confederacy tried to starve out the folks on the island. And finally, they launched some rounds into it. And you have the Civil War, 600,000 men and women dead. Certainly, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is the seeds of certain states or blocks of states nullifying certain federal laws that they don't like is certainly problematic for these states united, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've talked about it on and in kind of in vague terms, Glenn. I want to be real clear, man. Looking into your crystal ball, I know your brain is always thinking into this stuff, man. Where do you see everything going? Give me about the next year, 18 months. Where are we heading, Glenn?
The next year, we're going to continue to see the Biden administration make all kinds of crazy mistakes. They're doing stuff now. They're alienating their left base. I can't believe it. They're telling Guatemalans not to come to the United States. And what's up with that? I thought they were all about that. And a variety of other things. We've got the Fauci thing. You know, we've got that. I don't know if he'll get thrown under the bus. That's a DC inside the Beltway thing I don't care about. We're going to continue to see. It's going to be more and more obvious to average people that this country's goofed up. And I know that sounds weird because everybody always says, you know, like you listen to them in a coffee shop or they're filling up gas. They're like, oh, this is all messed up. It's going to be more concrete. It's not going to be that polite, like, oh yeah, politicians all suck. People are going to internalize things. They're going to have things happen to them, canceling cancer screenings. They're going to have stuff happen to them in which they say, wait a minute, this is entirely wrong. And they're going to get more strident, I think would be a good word. I didn't want to say radicalized because that's not what I mean. That's more of a BLM thing. The left is going to be more and more violent because they can't get prosecuted. I mean, they may get arrested. They may get fingerprinted. They may get booked. The prosecuting attorneys in all these blue cities won't do a thing about it. I have cop friends. It drives them insane. They go and they get bottles thrown at them. They get hit in the face with a brick. They arrest somebody. And the prosecuting attorney lets them go, never charges them, blah, blah, blah. So I think you're going to see that. I mean, in a short sentence, the answer is in the next year, a continuation of what we've been seeing, further unraveling and all of that. I think things could get weird in 2022 because of a political thing. Normally political things I don't think really drive a lot of stuff, but as inflation gets worse, as supply disruptions get worse, as it costs $1,000, you know, to build a tree fort with plywood, you know what I mean? Crazy stuff like that. The 2022 congressional and midterm elections, Senate and Congress, and a lot of states have important elections, are going to be really, really spicy because now people have regular people who probably didn't even vote or didn't even care. They're like $1,000 for a treehouse. Are you kidding me? We got to stop this nonsense. And there's going to be a lot of conservatives going to the polls, and there's going to be a lot of cheating. And people saw the cheating in 2020. I don't think anyone can debate that there wasn't cheating. And people are going to be hyper sensitive in the political process. You mentioned the prelude to the Civil War. Obviously, you know, Tennessee state elections in the 1850s and early 1860s were fist fights, right?
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah, that's right.
It was bad news, and it was brawling, and worse. And you're gonna. I don't think I'm not necessarily saying that in 2022, but politics is going to become a contact sport in 2022, and that's going to have some weird ramifications, and the economic effects are just going to be just terrible. So that's this year and next year. And as far as going farther out, more of the same, more of the unraveling. I mean, this process that we're in just keeps rolling and getting worse is basically it. I mean, in contrast, I'm not saying like in 2023, China launches a nuclear attack on the United States. You know what I mean? Nothing dramatic and big and specific and like down to one day where everyone across the country is watching TV on the same day, like 9/11, and like, holy Toledo, that just happened. I don't see it as one big event. Now, that being said, big events happen, right? And change things. I really think China is going to do some mischief, maybe even some of the hacking stuff. China may hack the United States electrical grid and basically go on TV and say, yeah, we did that. What are you going to do about it, punks? It's kind of what they're doing with with the COVID virus.
Oh, by the way, you owe us trillions of dollars.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and when you give us our money, we'll turn the electricity back on, you jerks. So the continued hollowing of the state, the very mild cartelification, maybe becoming more medium strength, that sort of thing. So not that you're asking for this, but people often ask me, you know, for like these, like the big Chinese attack kind of things. And I kind of have a boring answer. It's kind of just simmering and ongoing. But now people can see the simmering ongoing. And 5 years ago, they couldn't. Yeah. Because of what we went through in 2020 and part of 2021. So I hope that gets at what you were asking about.
It absolutely does. And the final question, Glenn, before I let you go, thank you so much for your time, man. It's been amazing. I want to ask you, besides reading your novel series, besides listening to Prepping 2.0 or becoming a member of the American Warrior Society, what can the average American do to make themselves harder to kill? Them and their families, by the way.
Number one thing, everyone always asks me a variation of that, which is, what's the number one thing to do to prep? And the same answer applies to your question, and that is lose your normalcy bias. Once you've lost that, once you become aware that there might be threats to you and that you can't just go skipping down the road Mayberry style, everything opens up. And then you say, well, now wait a minute, I really should conceal carry. Well, if I'm going to do that, I need to get trained. And how do I go about that? And how do I take some basic precautions, you know, in a parking lot? When you realize there's a reason and the stakes are high, like your life and your family's life, you're going to take those steps. So that, I think, is the number one way to be harder to kill, is understand, believe it or not, some people may want to kill you. And that was not true years ago, because I don't walk around thinking everybody's out to get me. But given what we've seen, especially if you're anywhere near a city this summer, there are going to be roadblocks. They're going to be pulling people out of vehicles. I mean, all that kind of stuff. So that's not a specific answer like wear body armor all the time or something like that. Probably not terribly practical, but mental preparation, knowing there's something to be prepared for, opens up the floodgates of all the details that then flow into place and get really good training. I'm one of those guys. I'm not a gear guy. I'm not a $7,000 AR guy. I don't train enough, to be really honest, because I'm way too busy. And now it's kind of hard, you know, with like having a needle in your heart and a pump all day, you know, for it's kind of, the port in my heart is right where I shoulder a rifle. And I was like, to my doctor, I was like, could we put that on the other side? He's like, no, your aorta's over here. I'm like, okay, that's a good argument. Okay, you're a doctor, aorta, I get it. But I don't train enough to be candid. I train some, and I haven't for a while, but spend the money on training. Spend the money on training ammo. Dry firing is amazing. Candidly, don't do enough of it. A friend of mine who does a lot of dry firing was recently in a very bad situation and came out on top and is alive now. I think directly because of his very serious dry firing regimen. So I'm trying to be vague here because there's a lot of reasons to be vague, but it works is my point. And focus on that mindset and practical stuff, and don't get into the gizmo gear side of things. I think a lot of that is petered out, to be really honest. Maybe it's just me, but I don't see, Facebook or Instagram posts all the time about this one new weapons light that is super awesome. I'm not seeing that nearly as much anymore. I think people have kind of, as a group, gone through that phase. And now they're like me. They're like, hey, lever action guns are pretty cool. The evolution, right? So yeah. Mindset is the #1 way to be harder to kill. Being in good shape is important too, for a variety of reasons. I've been in good shape. I'm not now because I can't exercise. It sucks. By the way, everyone says when you're on chemotherapy, you lose weight. Not this cowboy. I'm still at my pre-surgery weight. And now I got to actually, once I get fixed and I can move around, I got to actually lose weight, which is a good problem to have. I grant you that. But being strong helps you mentally, helps your endurance. And if you're a man, especially if you're a father, I think being in decent shape is very good as an example to other people, especially young men in your family, that you can't be a Cheeto warrior, right? I mean, I think that's an important thing too, is to get the younger folks, be a good role model for the younger folks, and being moderately fit is a really good way to do that.
Oh, great stuff. Great stuff, Glen. I really, really appreciate that. Hopefully everybody's listening. Glen, where can they find you and consume your content?
Best place, central location, would be the Prepping 2.0 website, which is prepping2-0.com, prepping2-0.com. Find out about the books, 299days.com. My wife's books, which are great, 3-book series, agreatstate.com. I also have something, Pam Radio, which is Prepper Amateur Radio. I had to learn radios because I didn't know anything about it. I had to teach my team. So I came up with these electronic flashcards that there's 147 of them. It takes 45 minutes. It's all the practical stuff about comms, tactically oriented, all the stuff you need to know, none of the stuff you don't. It's not a ham radio test prep thing. Trust me, it's like, okay, I got 5 guys on my crew. We're going to get some Baofangs and some push-to-talks. What do I need to know to go out and shoot and communicate, shoot, move, and communicate, right? And so there's that, pam-radio.com, super easy. So that's another way. That's another thing I got going on. Just like a side gig, just like, hey, I'll just do electronic flashcards about comms. I mean, how hard can it be? It was hard.
And I've just to make it easy for everybody watching and listening, I've got links to all of Glen's content in the show notes. And Glen, hopefully I'll run into you out there in Montana, my friend. I'm out there teaching classes. I'll be out there next week. So there won't be a Coffee with Rich next week. I'll be on the range all week. And Friday morning, we're going to have on an excellent guest who is going to discuss some of the things that Glen alluded to. He is a full-time SWAT member of a large Southwestern SWAT team. And he's told me stories about the cartels doing operations in his city and the way that they're combating that. It's stuff that never hits the news. Hopefully we'll talk about some of that stuff this Friday. So check out Coffee with Rich then. Glen, thank you for being a guest on the show, brother. It's been amazing.
Well, thank you. I loved it. Great. And please have me on again if you don't mind me inviting myself, because I love talking to you. This is a great conversation.
I love to, Glen. We'll make that happen. I promise. Okay, guys, remember, be safe because the fight is coming. Be ready.